They're graceful and docile creatures that are often hunted for the sport and their meat. But it's not human activity that's threatening Florida's precious key deer, who have been dying at an alarming rate. The culprit is a flesh-eating pest called the New World screwworm.
As that larvae grows, it screws itself down into the flesh, and it eats on living flesh, and it continues to bore down in that flesh, and it can cause all type of injuries to the host.
About 1,300 endangered deer live in the Florida Keys, and nowhere else in the world. It is believed that the miniature deer have lived in this area for over 6,000 years. The establishment of the refuge 50 years ago allowed for protection and recovery of the precious species. But in the last 2 months alone, more than 130 deer, roughly 10% of the population, have died of screwworm. Now entomologists are working to figure out where the infestation came from.
The eradication from the southern United States was completed in about 1966, 50 years ago. And so up until this year, we've been free of screwfly.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture set up a command center at the airport in Marathon, Florida, to fight the infestation. Among their efforts, releasing tens of millions of sterilized flies from Panama into the area.
The female only mates once in her lifetime. So if we release enough sterilized flies to try to ensure that that mating that takes place is to a sterile male, then obviously no offspring are produced.
The hope is that this mating will prevent the births of new screwworm larvae. The flies are being released through 25 ground release sites across Marathon and the infected zones.
Now that's a piece of the treated stuff.
Meanwhile, volunteers are working with fish and wildlife officials on Big Pine Key to treat affected animals and prevent the screwworm outbreak from spreading further.
A key deer is just, it's symbolic of like what is really special about this area and what's really special about this country, and the fact that people have poured their hearts and souls in helping protect an animal that's really on the brink of extinction.
Going through extensive training on how to lure and feed the deer, the volunteers hide the anti-parasitic medication in bread and feed it to the deer. And the treatment appears to be working. Only one deer found with screwworm was euthanized in the past month. To prevent more human contact and ensure treatment of all types of deer, feeding troughs or medication stations have been set up across the Florida Keys.
There's no people involved, so if they are skittish deer, they can just come up to these and feed and get dosed.
The biotechs have also placed wildlife cameras around the stations to monitor the deer.
As screwworm can infect any warm-blooded animal, here at mile marker 106, the Florida Department of Agriculture has been conducting pet checks in their efforts to eradicate the parasite before it moves further up north and devastates the commercial cattle industry.
We'll conduct an inspection. That inspection will be based on a series of questions that we pose to them to determine if they should proceed to their destination or that they need to have a more thorough examination by the veterinary medical officer on site.
Over 1,000 pets have been inspected. So far, none with screwworm.
You did so good. You did so well.
But refuge workers say they're not going to leave until the key deer situation is stable.
Until we get to the point where the USDA and the screwworm folks say, hey, you guys can, we're feeling really good about this situation. We're going to continue orally treating the deer. Here's an animal that just, it lives nowhere else but here, and it really is something that the local community is proud of.
For UMTV, I'm Danny Dykes.